Judith, thank you so much for joining us in the Monday, 3rd October 2022 edition of the Storytelling by and for Adults series. Please introduce yourself fully, tell us about your work, and please tell us a story.
Well, thank you again. It's wonderful to be in such a great ensemble of storytellers. And Eric, thank you very much for having me here as well. And since I'm on my iPhone, I hope my focus is okay so that I'm sort of in the center here. I'm a storyteller, and I also have a theater background. I've been telling stories for more than 30 years. I produce storytelling festivals and teach workshops. And one of my specialties is telling the grimmest of the Grimm tales. And Jack Zipes, who is the American scholar on the Grimm fairy tales, saw one of my performances once and actually got my CD and was extremely supportive. And because of him, I have continued on to tell these stories, and I often tell them with my musician, Dan Marcotte, who has created original music. He accompanies me on Renaissance lute with these stories, and he has created original bloody choruses for some of these stories that you may not know. These are certainly not with the Disney endings. These are mostly from the 1812 first edition of the Brothers Grimm Household and Nursery Tales. And these were the most horrific ones. And I used to think the Juniper Tree that I'm about to tell you was the bloodiest and goriest. And that's what I really enjoy. Until Jack told me, well, we accompanied him at a book launch of his new edition a few years ago. And he said, I'd love to see what you would do with the children who play at slaughtering. I will spare you that today, but let me tell you, that one is much more horrific than the Juniper Tree. And the Juniper Tree is rather dark as well. But Regina also referenced All Hallows Eve. We're in October. We're close to Halloween, which is a big deal in America. And in fact, at the end of the month, I'm going back to Illinois, and Dan and I, my musician, are having a reunion tour, and we're telling this show live for 4 performances. So in case anybody's in Illinois at the end of the month on October 29th and 30th, you will have the full experience with music and bloody choruses. You're going to forgive me. I will sort of sing these, and I am not the singer. So shall I begin? So this is the Juniper Tree. There was once a beautiful and pious young woman who was married to a very wealthy merchant. Oh, they loved each other dearly, but they longed for a child. Every day she would stand beneath her beloved juniper tree and pray for a child. And one day in winter, with snow on the ground, as she was paring an apple with a sharp knife, oh, she pricked her finger and bing, a drop of blood fell on the snow. And she wished and said, oh, if I could have a child as red as blood and as white as snow, how happy I would be. And all of a sudden, she felt as though her prayers would be answered. And the next day, the snow melted. And the next month, the green grass grew. And the next month, the tree trunk thickened. And the next month, there were blossoms on the branches. And the next month, there were ripe juniper berries. And the next month, she was ravenously hungry. And the next month, she ate of them, and she became ill. And she called her husband, and she said, dear husband, if I should die, please bury me here beneath the juniper tree. And the next month, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy who was as red as blood and as white as snow, and she held him to her breast. She was so overjoyed that her heart burst, and she died. And he buried her beneath the juniper tree, as was her wish. He tried to raise this young son alone. He really tried, but he realized that he could not do it. And so he married again. And with his new wife, they had a daughter Marlinchen. Oh, his wife doted upon Marlinchen. There was nothing she wouldn't do for their daughter. But that boy, she hated that boy. In fact, she never even called him by name. She only called him that boy. And she abused him physically and verbally. And she cuffed him on the ear and she threw him from one side of the room to the other side of the room. And she wouldn't even let him eat at the dining room table. And she served him scraps of rotting meat. One day, she kept saying, how can I get all my husband's money just for me and my daughter and none for that boy? As he grew, she tormented him. And one day, when her daughter Marlinchen was coming home from school, Marlinchen said, oh, mother, may I have an apple? And she said, of course, my darling. You know where I keep them. They're upstairs. They're in that chest with the very heavy lid and the iron clasp that ends in a razor-sharp point. Oh, yes, mother, I know. She said, well, follow me. And up the stairs they went. And her mother lifted that heavy, heavy lid with that razor-sharp clasp. And Marlinchen reached in to get a juicy red apple. But being a kind child, she said, oh, mother, shan't brother have one too? Fury seized her, and the mother took that apple, she threw it back into the chest, and she slammed shut the lid. So she spied the boy coming home from school through the window, and she asked him, would you like a juicy red apple? And the boy said, oh, I would, mother. And she said, this will be a whole delicious apple. And he said, there won't be a worm half sticking out. It's not half eaten or yellow around the edges. She said, no. And you know where I keep them, up in that chest. He said, no, I have always heard about it, but I have never had the privilege to get there. And she said, well, follow me. Today is your lucky day. And up the stairs they went. And as the mother lifted and lifted the heavy, heavy lid with that iron clasp ending in a razor-sharp point, the little boy reached in and she said, oh, why don't you just reach in a little farther? The juicier apples are toward the back. And as he lowered his innocent neck, she slammed shut the lid, cutting off his head. Oh, 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 as it rolled around among the apples, she said, oh, oh, oh. She wasn't upset because she had just decapitated her own son. No, she kept thinking, what if my husband finds out? Will I still get all that money for me and my daughter? So she lifted the lid, she retrieved the head, she placed it back on his body. She took a white silk kerchief, wrapped it around his neck, took his body, placed it on a chair in front of the kitchen door, and put an apple in his hand. Marlinchen passed by and saw the brother with the apple in his hand. And she went into the kitchen and she said, mother, mother, this isn't fair. You told me that I had to wait and not share my apple with brother until he came home. Now he has an apple and he's not sharing it with me. Oh, she said, this is what you do. That's very rude of him. You go back, you ball up your little fist, and if he doesn't share his apple with you, give him a swift box on the ear. So being a dutiful daughter, that's just what she did. Brother, she said, would you please give me an apple? And he said nothing, of course. And she thought, he looks very pale. And she took her little fist and she gave him a swift box on the ear. Oh, 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 she screamed as it went rolling down the corridor. And she went into the kitchen and her mother was already stirring a cauldron full of boiling water. And she said, mother, mother, I think I killed brother. And the mother said, oh, you naughty, what have you done? There's nothing for it. So we shall have to chop, 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 chop them up in a nice little, right little culinary stew. And Marlinchen is standing there and she's crying and her tears are falling into the big stew pot so that it needed no salt. Soon the father came home and said, wife, what's for dinner? I am ravenous. And by the way, where's my son? And she said, your dead wife's uncle came for a surprise visit and invited him to go to the country with him. And the father said, well, that's very strange. He wouldn't have left without saying goodbye to me. She said, oh, no, he wanted to go and he'll have a wonderful time. He'll be gone for about 6 weeks. Wife, he said, where's dinner? And she set the stew before him and he started to eat. He said, "this is delicious, and I feel as though it's mine, all mine, and you shall have none of it." And as he started to suck the flesh off the bones and throw the bones under the table, Marlinchen got her finest silk kerchief. She sat under the table and collected every last bone until she had them all. She tied them up in her silk kerchief, and she went outside and she placed them beneath the juniper tree. All of a sudden, the branches started to wave as though the tree were clapping, as though the tree were happy. And all of a sudden, there was a mist and a flame, and from that flame there flew a magnificent bird with green iridescent feathers and a golden circlet about its neck, and it began to sing. "My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. And pretty little Marlinchen gathered my bones. Coo-it, coo-I, coo-it, coo-I. What a clever bird am I." And the bird flew and flew and flew until it alit on a goldsmith's house. And the goldsmith was fashioning a golden chain when he heard this magnificent song, and the bird started to sing. But when the goldsmith came out, he said, "Bird, bird, I did not hear your whole song. Would you please sing it again for me?" And the bird said, "Nay, I shan't sing it twice for nothing. You shall have to give me something for it." And the goldsmith said, I just finished this golden chain. Would it be enough?" And he threw it up to the bird, and the bird caught it in its right talon and began to sing. "My mother killed me, my father, he ate me, and pretty little Marlinchen gathered my bones. Coo-it, coo-ee," and the bird flew and flew and flew until it came to a shoemaker's house. And the shoemaker had just finished making a beautiful pair of red shoes when he heard this magnificent song. And he heard the bird, and he went out and said, "Bird, bird, I did not hear your whole song. Could you please, please sing it again for me?" And the bird said, "Nay, I'll not sing it twice for nothing. You shall have to give me something for it." And he said, I just finished these red shoes. Will it do?" And brrr, he threw it up, and the bird caught it in its left talon and continued to sing the song. And if you care to join me in the bloody chorus, you may. "My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. And pretty little Marlinchen gathered my bones. Coo-it, coo-ee, coo-it, coo-I. What a clever bird am I." And the bird flew and flew and flew until it came to a mill. And there were 20 millers fashioning a millstone. Hick-hack, hick-hack. "My mother, she killed..." And one miller came out. "She killed me, my..." And he summoned another miller, and 2 more millers came out. "My mother, she..." And another miller came out, until finally the 20th miller came out and said, "Bird, bird, I didn't hear your whole song. Would you please sing it again for me?" And the bird said, "Nay, I'll not sing it twice for nothing. You shall have to give me something for it." And the miller said, "Well, if this millstone were mine alone, I would gladly give it to you, but it belongs to all 20 millers." And all 20 millers said, "Yes, yes, let's give it to the bird." And they all lifted it and lifted it and lifted it until it fit around the bird's neck, just as light as a collar. And the bird sang as it flew off. "My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. And pretty little Marlinchen gathered my bones," until it came back to its own house, landing in a linden tree. The father and his daughter and wife were sitting inside having supper when he heard this beautiful song. "My mother, she killed me." He said, "I feel as though I'm going to see an old friend again. I must go out." And his wife pulled him back and said, "No, no, please, please don't go. I feel as though this is the end of days. I feel as though the earth is going to swallow me up. I have such a headache." But the father said, "Oh, I must go out." And he shook her off, and out he went. And as soon as he stepped out, the bird dropped the golden chain. It fit about his neck perfectly. And he went back inside and said, look at the gift the bird gave me. And Marlinton said, oh, mother, I want to go outside. I want to see, maybe the bird has a gift for me too. But her mother pulled her back and said, please don't go. I feel as though my blood is on fire. I have such a headache. I feel as though my head is going to come off. Please don't go. Something terrible is going to happen. But Marlinton shook her off and out she went, and the bird dropped the red shoes. And she placed them on her feet, and they fit perfectly. And she danced around, and she danced right back into her house. And she showed her mother, and her mother said, oh, Marlinton, please, I don't want to go. And they all urged her and said, you must go out now. Maybe the bird has a gift for you as well. And she said, no, you mustn't, I mustn't. And she tried to push them away, but they gave her no peace, and they pushed her out the door. And as soon as she went, the bird dropped the millstone, flattening her. And then there was a mist and a flame, and from that mist there stepped a young boy who was as red as blood and as white as snow. And he took his sister's hand, and he took his father's hand, and they all went in for supper.
Mm-hmm.
Is the juniper tree.
Okay, thank you.
Technical difficulties, but you can see this online if you wish. There's a full version of it, and there are certain tracks on Spotify recording without any technical difficulties.
Okay, thank you so much. Perhaps paste the can you paste the link into the chat section, or send it to me by email maybe later.
Put in my name, Judith Heineman, and it'll show up, and you can go to
Okay.
Spotify. But I will send
Okay.
you the of the performance.
Wonderful. All right. So there was murder, but there was resurrection.
Redemption, yes.
Resurrection and redemption. That's what we need to know. We need to know that there can be resurrection and redemption. Moira, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. It was great to hear you tell a Grimm's tale. But at some stage, I wondered how I should sleep tonight. So thank you especially for the good ending. That was great.
There's a special horror to parents eating their children. I've come up to it in many different stories. Zeus, wasn't Zeus involved in something like this? The father of Zeus was trying to eat all of his children, I think. But
yes, and also tale of the Welsh bardic tale of Taliesin. Can you hear me? The Welsh bardic tale of Taliesin. He becomes a grain of rice, and Taliesin is converted into a grain of rice to escape, and that's invested. And then the boy comes out as the bard. So the devouring of his essence then transforms him into this very brilliant and award-winning bard. Yes. So that motif, if you will, is very common as well. But then, of course, there are all the major Greek tragedies where they, cut up for revenge. There isn't any really benefit at the end of it, but they cut up their enemies' children and serve it to the king in revenge.
And speaking of bards, I think it's in one of Shakespeare's plays. I think Timon of Athens maybe has something of a cutting up of a child and feeding it to a parent. I might be forgetting, but
Could be. Yeah. There's another one with a T, I believe, that is, maybe it's Timon, but there's one that is the bloodiest of.
Titus Andronicus. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, but if you have any other comments or questions, please let me know. And again, I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties.
That's fine. Your voice is coming very rich. I don't know if it's the phone or the connection, but your voice is coming just fine.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Hi,
Mm.
Regina.
Hi, Judith. How you doing? How you doing, honey?
Oh, you know, I mean, we must improvise and the show must go on, but
Michelle,
I do have terrible technical problems. So
yeah, it's tricky. But you know,
A little-
you did. It was wonderful. There's a Haitian story that has some of those elements in it too. And I can't remember the name of it, but it's in the Magic Orange Tree. I think the story that, again, we were talking before about these motifs being around the world, and motifs that, are just parents do eat their children. I mean, there's a whole thing about sacrifice and coming in new and all of that. There's so many ways to look at what is all that, because there's so much of that in so much of the folklore. The younger gods having to displace the older gods. So there's Osiris and Ra in there. So there's, these are old motifs, but that whole thing about the eating, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's in that Haitian story too, which came from Europe at some point, right?
And your story, the one you told, also, Gail Rosen converted the Headley Coup. The Headley Coup is also the change. He adapted it and called it the Demon of Dubrovna, also about a demon that all these changes, and an old woman has to like watch it all, and she's nonplussed about it because she's got death and life and so many changes in life too. So it's very resonant of your story as well. Yeah.
Well, or these stories are resonant of reality. We're watching changes as we sit here on Zoom. I mean, just sitting here on Zoom is this major change that is then going to thrust the whole storytelling world and the whole thing, because a lot of people are saying, what do we do now? We are used to having these international amazing gatherings, yet so many of us think that in person is so much better because it's a whole other thing. And so there's just that, we're all part of this big change, among other things that are going on. So it's interesting, but that's why I'd said, when that storyteller who only wanted to hear modern story, personal stories about, all because we only want stories that are relevant to our lives. It's like, these stories are relevant to our lives. It's like, absolutely. That's what makes them interesting, as they're still around, because here we are. Yeah.
And modern storytellers who are telling moth-like stories are actually embracing the frame tale of starting with a folk tale, going to their personal story, and then coming back to the folk tale as well, which is another wonderful.
Or starting with the folk and going into personal. When I told Tamlin in a theater a few years ago, I had three times I stopped the story and asked the audience, have you ever experienced, here's how I've experienced, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, and thank God it's getting, that's people have figured out, they work together, the stories work together. That's the whole point of them. So they're timeless. There are heartless giants in the world. All we have to do is look around.
And
I have a problem with all those stepmother stories. I mean, but they're not really. And what I started to do when I was first telling to kids, then the only stepmother story I tell is to Pingy, but I say, not all stepmothers are bad, and the stepmother can be in your head, not being nice to you. But because so many of the kids at this point have stepmothers, and they have lovely stepmothers. So it becomes an interesting challenge to do stories like that but to not lose some of the audience because they think they're directly attacking somebody they love. So that's a very interesting kind of,
repertoire of loving and redemptive, like the first one of the stories that were told this morning of wonderful stepmothers who are nurturing and supportive. We'll have to get a genre.
It's not all, but we know, those of us who look at the folklore or look at, psychology know that they are metaphor or the symbols or, all kind of words to use, archetypes. But it says you don't want to lose half the kids because they're thinking about something else, because or half the adults as well. So it's just an interesting challenge for those of us who wander into the turf of these very strong.
I have a whose stepmother was far kinder and nicer than her own mother, and was much happier with her. So,
right. And parents do eat children.
metaphorically, they certainly do.
They certainly do.
Some children eat parents.
I was thinking that too.
Yes, we eat each other.
So that's the richness of having the historical stories or the old stories that then it can infuse and see the relationship to the here and now personal stories. And that's, I think, what makes, a layered experience with the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm.
I will definitely try to send you the link of the full out performance with my musicians so people can see that there is, to see it without its technical difficulties, I hope. And again, if anybody is live and in Illinois, we're going to do this. I'm so excited to do a live performances after so many years in Lamont, Illinois, a little like 20 minutes south of Chicago, with reuniting with my lute player and doing these shows.
I put in the chat. I'm in if you're in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for some bizarre reason next weekend. I'm telling Tamlin, but I'm telling more like a 20-minute version, not a 12-minute version of Tamlin, for the folk festival next weekend, along with other stories of dauntless and daring girls, women.
New York, so I'm an hour north of Manhattan. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning. So I'm there.
No, I'll be in Albuquerque.
So I hope to see you, Regina, when you get back to New York.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you.